You're listening to the Rawha, Daily Guidance for Seekers with Shaykh Faraz Rabbani, who will be covering Imam Yusuf al-Nabahani's beautiful collection of 40 sets of 40 Hadith of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, as well as Imam Zarnuji's guidance for seekers of knowledge regarding the ways of seeking knowledge, Ta'lim al-Muta Turuq al-Allum.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيبنا محمد حبيب رب العالمين وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. Alhamdulillah. In our Daily Rawha, in which we look at guidance from the teachings of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and advice for students of knowledge, we're in a critical section that is important for every believer in Imam Zarnuji's advice for the seeker of knowledge. And this Daily Rawha happens Mondays to Thursdays, 7 to 7:30 here at Seekers Hub, Toronto. We broadcast it on Facebook Live. And it's also available as a podcast from seekershub.org/podcasts. And Imam Zarnuji told us that one of the things that is absolutely required for the seeker of knowledge, if they want their knowledge to be of benefit, is to be scrupulous, right? Is to have wara. And wara is intermediate level taqwa, right? Wara is, or higher level taqwa, we can say. Taqwa, operationally, is to leave sin. Wara is to leave disliked matters and doubtful matters, right? Because if one wants to be a righteous servant of Allah, and if one wants to be a seeker of knowledge or someone serving the religion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then it's not sufficient that one be within the limits of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but to strive for righteousness, one must leave the disliked and the uncertain. And there's things that facilitate that. So he tells us, وَمِنَ الْوَرَعِ الْكَامِلِ أَنْ يَحْتَرِزَ عَنِ الشِّبَهِ وَكَثْرَةِ النَّوْمِ وَكَثْرَةِ الْكَلَامِ فِي مَا لَا يَنْفَعُ. That from the perfection of scrupulousness is that one guard oneself from eating one's fill, and from excessive sleep, and from excessive speech in that which does not benefit. And these are areas these are sunnahs of the Prophet ﷺ that are emphasized. The Prophet ﷺ told us, the human being fills, مَا مَلَى ابْنُ آدَمَ وِعَاءً شَرًّا مِّن بَطْنٍ. No human being fills a container more detrimental for them than a stomach. بِحَسَبِ امْرِئٍ لُقَيْمَاتٌ يُقِمْنَ بِهَا صُلْبَهِ. It is sufficient for a person to have a few small morsels to keep their back straight. فَإِنْ كَانَ لَا مَحَالَ. If they must, then they should have a third of their fill for food, a third for their drink, and a third to be able to breathe. And practically, the ulama give us a very practical measure for that, which is, and it works, that a third of one's fill is to eat half one would normally incline towards eating. Right? So when one eats one's fill, one eats a little above and beyond the normal. Right? So if normally you'd incline to eat a plate full of food, eat half a plate. And that'll be fulfilling the rule of third. Right? So this is from the practical scrupulousness that a student of knowledge should apply to avoid eating to excess, and avoiding sleeping to excess. And sleeping to excess is sleeping beyond need or benefit. Because especially sometimes when people are stressed, they're dealing with difficulties or challenges, have a paper due, have an exam coming up, instead of actually working for it, sleep is often a way of escapism, right? And it wastes time. However, the ulama caution this why contextualization of text is so critical, that in the pre-modern age where you didn't have ready lighting at night, when it's completely dark, what would people do? They'd go to sleep. So it was one of the fitnas of that time would be that it would be very easy to be asleep at night, because lighting up the night was a big challenge. Right? The fitna in our time, in many ways, is getting enough sleep, because it's so easy to be up at night. Right? But there's also the sleep that's above and beyond. Right? On the weekend, what are you doing? I'm sleeping in. But a lot of it is just because you don't have a sense of purpose. Right? But to give your body its due is an obligation. And the third thing that's from scrupulousness is excessive speech in that which does not benefit. Again, a critical sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. Whoever believes in Allah and the last day, let them say what benefits or remain silent. Right? And فِيمَا لَا يَنْفَعُ, in that which does not benefit. And the seeker of knowledge, this is one of the keys. And we had a seminar recently here at the Hub last month on the key to change, which is restraining one's speech. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, and it's amazing. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu ittaqullah wa qulu qawlan sadida. O you who believe, have taqwa of Allah and say words that are straight. Right? That are purposeful. يُصْلِحْ لَكُمْ أَعْمَالَكُمْ. He will rectify for you all your actions. How? The divine promise is commit to taqwa, take care of your speech, and Allah will rectify for you your actions. وَيَغْفِرْ لَكُمْ ذُنُوبَكُمْ. And He will forgive for you your sins. وَمَنْ يُطِعِ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ. And whoever obeys Allah and His Messenger, فَقَدْ فَازَ فَوْزًا عَظِيمًا, has succeeded with tremendous success. So that's, if you want to change something in your life, change how you speak. Beyond what is beneficial, which is that which is one is sure will have beneficial consequences. So these are three things: to restrain one's eating, to have discipline with respect to one's sleep, and to control one's speech. And that's something that one can never remind oneself enough of. And so these are three. The next one will be a shock, and it's a challenge, and all of us, nasallallahu subhanahu wa ta'ala afiyah, have to work on this, because in traditional societies it was considered very strange. Now in our times it's so facilitated. You just order Uber Eats. You don't need to go get the food; it comes to you. You don't even have to pay for it. It's all built into the app, right? He says, وَنْ يَحْتَرِزَ عَنْ أَكْلِ طَعَامِ السُّوقِ إِنْ أَمْكَنَ. And to keep from eating the food of the marketplace, if possible. But this is not because it's inherently bad, because of scrupulousness is to avoid the dubious, the disliked, and the dubious. Right? And anything connected with the disliked and dubious would have elements of dubiousness. Right? He explains why. لأن طعام السوق أقرب للنجاسة والخيانة. Because the food of the marketplace is closer to filth and to cheating. Filth here does not mean just it's actual like ritual filth, like najasa, but impurities. Right? And the most critical impurity is what when it comes to food? What's the most dangerous impurity relating to food? No. The most direct is the meat itself. Right? Because unslaughtered meat that is not slaughtered in a ritually sound manner, is najis. It's najis. You are eating filth. Right? If someone said that your plate may have excrement, we'll say, oh, hopefully it doesn't, and just eat it. No, okay? Because the possibility of eating excrement in najasa is called najasa because mustaqdar, it's vile, right? But we take it, oh, inshallah it's halal. If it's not halal, you're eating excrement, right? It's najis, right? And you wouldn't agree to dine on excrement and urine, right? But why? Because that's how odious it is to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? And there's wisdoms in it because of the sanctity of life And Allah has chosen that you cannot consume an animal except in this way. In the marketplace, if you look at it economically, there are numerous incentives to cut corners. Margins for restaurants are very low. Most restaurants fail. Right? What would drive someone to serve you halal food? Right? Economically, say, well, they'll speak truth. The basis is that people act on the basis of self-interest. The self-interest of most people, the self-interest when it comes to serving you food, is that the seller would serve you what is cheapest. Why? That's how they'll make some money. And the claim of it being halal is very easy to make. All you have to do is put up a sign. So what would cause someone to serve what's right is that they're truthful, that they're upright. Right? And in the marketplace, there will be some people who are upright, and some people who are not, and some people whose uprightness is uncertain. So at the very least, basic caution would entail, avoid those who are not upright when it comes to food. At an establishment where they don't care about disobeying Allah when it comes to blasting lewd music. They have posters of haram things. All these things going on in which they do not observe the limits of Allah. And there's no economic incentive for them to be playing haram music. Right? No one goes to a restaurant just for the music. And there's no direct economic incentive for them to put posters up on the wall. Right? Most people don't go to a restaurant, oh, they have a poster of whichever actress, so I'm going to sit there. Right? The economic their personal incentive relates to the food that they're serving. So they don't care about the limits of Allah and the easy things. Why would they care about the limits of Allah with the testing thing, which is the food that they're serving? Oh, but they said that it's halal. But they also said that they're Muslim. Right? But they, so we don't judge them. We don't judge them. Maybe they don't know, maybe they're heedless, whatever. We don't judge them. But that's basic caution. That at the very least, if you make a simple distinction, the halal bayyin wal haram, the lawful is clear and the unlawful is clear, there are people who are openly questionable, right? By open signs. You don't have to investigate, does he pray, whatever, that's none of our business. But by outward signs. So anyone who has any concern about religion should not eat at places that are openly, that where you see open disobedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? And then there are places where you know that this is clearly, these are people of clear religious concern. Right? But even then, incentives exist to the contrary. Right? And then there's the dubious middle. Right? Dubious middle. Caution entail practically being careful about what one eats from. Otherwise, know for sure that some of the time you're eating the equivalent of excrement. And then, will it not affect your spiritual health? Yeah. Of course, as a community, we need to ensure that there are standards of halal in our communities. Right? This is why it's a communal obligation to ensure that there's sound halal certification processes. And we should be supporting them, and even if they're weak and limited, those who care should proactively support these certification processes because they take care of a wider communal interest. Right? So it's closer to najasa. Right? But najasa, not who urinates in their food, right? The najasa being the filth of the meat itself. And like it, other unlawful ingredients. But those are secondary. Wal khiyana, and cheating. Most restaurants do not pay minimum wage to their staff. Employment practices in restaurants are some of the worst of any industry. And you're indirectly a party to that. And that affects you. Right? There's cheating, because margins in restaurants are very marginal. Any corner that can be cut is cut. So That's the second reason. The third, وَأَبْعَدُ عَنْ ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ, and further from the remembrance of Allah. They say one of the adab of cooking is one should remember Allah over the food. Right? And in some traditional cultures they used to say how much salawat you should make, how much dhikr you should make, so that people engage in dhikr in their food, in their cooking. And the states surrounding something affect the state of that thing itself. The black stone came down from heaven. It was whiter than snow, but it was the hands of humans that darkened it. Right? And one's affected by the states of things. Just like you may not be smoking, but if you're sitting around smokers, you'll be affected by secondhand smoke. Even though you didn't smoke, you're not morally responsible, but you are spiritually affected. Likewise, things that are made out of heedlessness are disadvantageous. وَأَقْرَبُ إِلَى الْغَفْلَةِ, and closer to heedlessness. And another reason, وَلِأَنَّ أَبْصَارَ الْفُقَرَاءِ تَقَعُ عَلَيْهِ, and because the gaze of the poor fall upon that food. وَلَا يَقْدِرُونَ عَلَى الشِّرَاءِ مِنْهُ, and they're not able to buy that food. فَيَتَأَذَّوْنَ بِذَلِكَ, and they're hurt by that. فَتَذْهَبُ بَرَكَتُهُ, so its blessedness goes. And that's why they say particularly one should be careful as a general not to go too often to places that are too lavish. Right? Right? And the sunnah is to stay within one's means. So even if there's circumstances, one has a hectic lifestyle, at work, at lunch, one wasn't able to get food ready, one goes for a lunch break, etc. But even one does, you could afford to go wherever, to Marché or somewhere fancy, go a little less. Why? Because of this consideration. And they say one of the things, anytime you enjoy some open blessing of Allah, one of the things that guards the tib in it is to give a similar amount in charity or in some way of good, and that preserves the khair. Right? So, and just have a practice. If any time you eat out, number one, make sure you go to a place, right, of where people are wholesome, upright. And even with non-Muslim establishments, there's a difference between going to a place that's decent, right, where there's not like open corruption, or a place where that's out there, right? Because you get affected just even by the environment you're in. And number two, anytime you partake of a blessing, just make it a habit to give something in charity. That expresses that you don't just care for yourself, but you do care, because none of you believes until they wish for others of the good that they wish for themselves. So that's Imam Zarnuji's advice for the seeker of knowledge with respect to things to be careful about. Right? Eating, sleep, and speech, and particularly where one gets one's food from. Right? Similarly, if you eat, they say when in Damascus, the ulama used to emphasize it, said choose your butcher carefully. Choose butchers who are upright. Same one, because the incentive of, you don't think ill of the person in particular, but you exercise caution. And the sunnah is, think well of people, but exercise caution. Our habit is we think badly of people, we speak bad, we put them down the whole time. We don't exercise caution. And that's foolish. Right? The sunnah is, be careful, don't trust until the trust is established. But where there's, be cautious when it has to do with your well-being or the well-being of others. So he mentions an example. He says, حكي أن شيخ الإمام الجليل محمد بن الفضل رحمه الله تعالى كان في حال تعلمه لا يأكل من طعام السوق، وكان أبوه يسكن في الرستاق ويهيئ له طعامه ويدخل إليه يوم الجمعة. It's related that this great scholar Imam Muhammad ibn al-Fadl rahimahullah ta'ala, during his seeking of knowledge, did not used to eat from the marketplace. And his father lived in the countryside. Right? And he used to prepare for him his food and used to come to him each Friday. فَرَأَى فِي بَيْتِ ابْنِهِ خُبْزَ السُّوقِ. And one day the father saw in his son's house bread from the marketplace. يوما فَلَمْ يُكَلِّمْهُ سَاخِطًا عَلَيْهِ. And he didn't talk to him out of anger at his son. You're seeking knowledge, how could you do this? فَاعْتَذَرَ ابْنُهُ. So his son excused himself and said, مَا اشْتَرَيْتُهُ وَلَمْ أَرْضَ بِهِ. I didn't buy it and I wasn't content with it. وَلَكِنْ أَحْضَرَهُ شَرِيكي. But rather, my partner, right, my companion in studying, brought it over. فَقَالَ لَهُ أَبُوهُ. So his father said, لو كنت تحتاط وتتورع عن مثله لم يجترئ شريكك على ذلك. He said, the father said, right? And his father was a villager. It wasn't and typically villagers weren't that learned, but he had taqwa in his heart. He said, if you were cautious and scrupulous regarding the like of this, then your friend would not have the courage to go and bring the like of this. Okay? هكذا كانوا يتورعون. This is how scrupulous they were. Okay? Now the legal ruling is the halal is halal to eat. Right? But prophetic teachings teach us to be careful. Right? To be careful. And the ulama say practically in our times, be careful. If you're going to eat from a restaurant, be careful that it's a restaurant that you have good reason to be sure would in fact be halal. And the claim of halal absolves you legally, but it can still affect you negatively. Because there's a good possibility. Anyone with a little common sense and some awareness of economics would say that at least, if you look just at the basic economics, 25 to 50% of halal meat served in our community, at least, would be expected not to be halal. I don't know what the exact numbers are, but just if you look at the price of regular meat and halal meat, right, you can expect, just using simple economics, that 25 to 50%, perhaps more. We don't know. I don't know what the number is, but you can expect that. So you should exercise caution, right, practically. Right? And that safeguards your religion. And if you're trying to be of the righteous, you can't be of the righteous while engaging in the actions of the heedless. Nasallallahu al-afiyah. So in Damascus, we used to ask the teachers, but what about, because even now it's easy. Like, you get fool from the marketplaces there. So just the baseline is go to places where people are upright, and this also applies more broadly. If you're going to choose two, like if you're in a large city, for example, you have a choice of doing your shopping from multiple places. Don't just look at the worldly thing, that place has cheaper prices. Also look at the spiritual dimension of the choice. Right? Which place is a more wholesome environment to shop in? Right? Number two, which place has better policies, has better labor practices? Which place has better environmental practices, are more careful about where they source their food from? Right? And these are areas of caution. One of the other places that in our times one has to be particularly careful about, and because it's mentioned in the hadith of Allah is pure and accepts nothing but the pure, right, is al-malbas. Right? The traveler who is desperate, dirty and disheveled, مطعمه حرام وإيش؟ Says وملبسه حرام, right? And their clothing was from the haram. Now this refers to the source of your wealth, but also you clothe yourself with the haram. Now, that is not just that don't wear silk if you're a man and gold, but also be careful. Most clothing that is sold is not, there's a high degree of possibility that's not ethically sourced. Right? So be careful. Make sure, and there are, even the large chains, after the crisis, what happened in Bangladesh, with the factory collapse and so on, there are many large chains that agreed to certain baseline standards of worker rights that their suppliers have to adhere to. And that's an area of caution, because darkness bequeaths darkness, and light bequeaths light. That's an area, right, where we have to be very careful, right? And pay that little extra, get fewer things, but get them in a manner that's tayyib, right? That scarf that may be $2, but there's someone that's been wronged for you to get that, right? Someone's been hurt, harmed, right? So clothing is one of the areas requiring particular caution in our times, because there's a lot of, and you can research it if you wish, right? Which is not saying that clothing from Bangladesh, by the way, is haram or anything, right? But make sure there's places that work to good labor practices, good environmental practices, and you're rewarded for that, right? You're rewarded for that, right? فَلِذَلِكَ, he said, وُفِّقُوا لِلْعِلْمِ. That's why they were granted success in attaining knowledge, وَالنَّشْرِ, and in spreading it. حَتَّى بَقِيَ اسْمُهُمْ إِلَى يَوْمِ الْقِيَامَةِ, until their names remain until the last day. وَوَصَّى فَقِيهٌ من زهاد الفقهاء طالب العلم فقال له عليك أن تحترز عن الغيبة وعن مجالسة المكثار. One of the fuqaha of zuhud, of renunciation, advised a seeker of knowledge, telling him, it is incumbent upon you to keep away from backbiting and from keeping the company of those who speak excessively. Right? And backbiting is sinful both to engage in and to listen to. And the seminar we had on speech, we touched upon it a little bit. Sheikh Rami Ansur has an excellent course on seekers on the prohibitions of the tongue, which I would recommend everyone, and even if you listened to it before, it's something that we always have to remind ourselves about, because the Prophet ﷺ said, whoever can guarantee for me 2 things, I guarantee for them paradise. Like the Prophet ﷺ is your guarantor for paradise, said if you do 2 things. If you can restrain your speech, and if you can restrain your sexual desires. Right? So that's how significant it is. And we'll close with, and then he said, وَقَالَ إِنَّ مَنْ يُكْثِرُ الْكَلَامَ يَسْرِقُ عُمُرَكَ. He said, whoever speaks excessively steals your life. وَيُضَيِّعُ أَوْقَاتَكَ, and they waste your time. Right? And then he talks about avoiding bad company and sinful company and the company of the lazy, and rather actively seeking the company of the righteous. So we'll continue from there. وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم والحمد لله رب العالمين.
Thank you for listening to the Rawha, Daily Guidance for Seekers with Shaykh Faraz Rabbani. Help Seekers Hub give light to millions around the world by supporting us through monthly donations by going to seekershub.org/donate. Your donations are tax deductible in the US and Canada.